Welcome to Artistic Adventures. We're going to finish up Baby Yoda today because I lost a lot of different clips from where I was trying to save it as I went along. And so we're going to just put together what I have left and finish him up. All right, so we do have this part where we took him out of the mold in the last video, and he looks great. There's a couple little bubbles and things like that, but we can fix those. We can fill those in with some thickened silicone. So the first thing we're going to do is cut off the top of his head. Now we're just going to cut off this pour spout, but we're going to have to repair that, and we're also going to have to add in those ridges that are going to be missing because that's where the pour spout was. But once again, we can do that with thickened silicone. There's also just a couple of bubbles on the top of some of those ridges where I didn't get the silicone into because of, it's just gravity, and I didn't realize I needed to push those in and sort of get the silicone to flow into them. But I'm learning. This was my first silicone project, and as such, I'm really, really thrilled with it because I'll tell you, I've made two since then. Uh, Actually, I made another Baby Yoda, which turned out great, and then I've made a couple of silicone babies that were like cursed children from Rosemary's Baby or something. So right now what I'm doing is just clipping off some of those little areas where the silicone went up into the seam in the back. Just clipping them off right flush with the skin. Most of those you don't have to repair, only if there's like a big hole. Sorry, I had to break there because my dog started barking inside. So they've gone out now and they're barking outside, but you can probably still hear them. Anyway, so we're going to fill up these holes, and basically what I do is I use some thickened silicone. I thicken it with a product called Thivex. It comes in a little bottle, and unfortunately that was one of the sections that I lost. You don't get to see me do that, but basically just want to thicken it up to where you can mold it. And what I use is a brush with some acetone on it, really wet, to mold it so it doesn't stick to the brush. Now I'm mixing up some more color to put on him because he's pretty translucent right now. If I made him again, which I did, I'd put a little more color into the silicone that I'm molding. That would keep me from having to add some color later, but I did do some stippling of color onto him, some darker colors, some more yellowish colors. Of course, that's another thing that I lost, but I just used a brush to sort of just stipple it on, and you'll see the end result. But right now I'm mixing brown and green and brown. I'm sorry, brown, yellow, and green. And I wanted to just create a little bit of a more muted, sort of an olive color. Uh, I think that he's kind of, yeah, he's kind of that muted olive color. Even maybe you want to need to put some white in there. But I just want to mix up enough of this so that I have it as I'm working, because I'm going to be doing several different things where I need to add color, and I want the tone to be the same. So you just kind of have to keep going, adding and taking away till you get what you want. But I've got a sort of a nice dark forest green there. Uh, Depending on how much you put in the silicone, is going to depend on how dark he is. So what I did, and this after this, the clip is missing, is I mixed the dragon skin, I put the Thivex in the color, and then I molded those areas on top of his head to have the little ridges that we know that he has. So sorry about that. I don't know. This is the first time I've tried to save clips ahead of time as I work, and it really didn't work for me. I really prefer to do it as I go along because I just forget what I've done, and I had 2 days on one card, and some of that went with one project and some went with another. But I was going so fast with this that I kind of had to do that because otherwise I would have had to make it like a video a day because I was so excited. Now I'm using Psycho Paint to put color down on him. You can't use like acrylic paints or whatever because they don't stick. Nothing sticks to silicone except silicone. And Psycho Paint is a form of platinum silicone. I'm also using this silicone thinner at times to thin it out some so that when I put it down, it's not quite so heavy. because as it's silicone, it's going to be, like another layer on him. It's not thin. It's going to be whatever thickness you put in, just like we did with the dragon skin. So you mix this Psycho paint the same as you do the other silicone that we've worked with. You use equal parts 1 and 2, and I'm using a graduated medicine cup to measure this. I'm also kind of doing it a little bit by sight, where I'll pick up a certain amount on the stick. I can just sort of visually tell. It's pretty forgiving. I mean, it's not something that you have to have down to the micro, milliliter or whatever. It's pretty forgiving. As long as you get approximately the same amount, it's going to be fine. So we just mix this up, and then we use the Silk Pig pigments, which are in those little jars you see. And I'm going to be using that green that I've already mixed up. And then I'm going to add in some white, because I want it to be a little bit more opaque and a little bit more, a little bit softer, which I think, this is hard, because every time you see him, he looks a little different, honestly. And a lot of times it's dark when you see him. I think they do that so you can't see he's a puppet or whatever. But anyway, you can see that I've added back the little lumps on his head here. That worked pretty good with the thickened silicone. And I'm using him tied up in his mother mold here just to keep him upright, because I want to put all this paint on the top of the head. Now, this paint is pretty much like the dragon skin. It is going to run. It's about that consistency. So anywhere you put it in any thickness, you can expect it to run. And that was one of the issues that I had with this project, especially on this first one. There were areas where the silicone ran, and it's not like paint. You can't wipe it off or, take it off with some acetone. Once it dries, it's a piece of the body. It's a piece of silicone. So if you get a drip, there's going to be a drip on the body unless you cut it off. That's one of the things I really don't like about working with silicone. I'm really more comfortable working with paint. That's what I've always worked with in the past. And I've found that, I guess everybody makes mistakes. I certainly make my fair share. So it's really hard when you make a mistake with the silicone to go back and correct it. If you make a problem with a paint, you can maybe go over the paint. That doesn't really always work with silicone. If you get some paint on an area, the silicone paint, it's stuck. It's there. It's part of the body, and it's going to be that color. So going over it is not always the best option. But for this particular color, I'm just putting it all over his head, and I didn't really put it all over the body, just on the face. I think his face looked a little bit more like a solid color to me, and the rest of the body I did a lot more stippling on. And here I'm just adding more paint to the layers just to make sure that I've got everything covered, and so it doesn't show through so much. This Psycho paint, it's just basically it's clear silicone, so you're putting some color in it, but it doesn't necessarily cover everything in one coat. All right, so like I said, I lost a lot of footing between here and now, and you can see now the stippling that I did, some of the dark green colors, and I did some yellows, and just wanted to add a little bit of dimension and lifelike look to him, more like sort of a reptile skin look, I guess. Now what I'm doing is I'm taking some of the Psycho paint that's kind of an orangish brown color, which he seems to have around his eyes in most of the pictures that I've seen. I also use this on his fingernails because they have a sort of brownish orange look to them also. It's hard to find a picture of him where you can see both his hands and his feet at the same time. I had to go back and look at some of the videos, some of the actual shows sometimes to see his feet, because that's the thing you really see the least of is his feet. So you kind of have to imagine a little bit what he looks like under that voluminous robe, which I've come to realize. I think that's like they didn't have any clothes for him, so they took somebody's shirt and cut it off. That's why it looks so big, like around the neck and stuff. Probably it also helps to hide any puppetry that's going on, but to me, that's kind of what it looks like. If you see some of the close-up pictures of him, he does seem to have different outfits at different times. The one you're most familiar with is that one. It's kind of a khaki color, but it has that sheepskin kind of collar, and that's the one I'm going to make for him. Of course, I lost all that film too, where I made the outfit, but you'll get to see the outfit and how it turned out anyway. So I'm just outlining his eyes with that orangish color. What I would do if you do this the second time when I did it, I'd put this orange color on after I cut the eye out, because you have to cut that whole section where the green is that looks like, the eyeball. You have to cut all that out to put the resin eye in that I'm going to make for him. And when I did, some of that area got cut, the orange part. But if you put it on after, if you put the orange coat on after you cut it, it dries to, a sort of smooth surface, so it doesn't look ragged. It looks more like, it's the eye, the lower lid or the upper lid of an eye. I think I did put a second coat of this on because it did not really cover the green a whole lot. Of course, I'm also trying not to be too heavy-handed with it because I don't want him to look like a clown or whatever, because the coloring on him is pretty subtle. I did do some shading with a darker color, but the shading on him is mostly he's just green, and he doesn't seem to have an awful lot of definition to his face in terms of color. It's just the creases and the wrinkles and things like that, which, we have those, but sometimes, it really helps to use darker colors on these flat surfaces like this to help give it some more dimension. Now, this Psycho paint takes a couple hours to dry, or actually it's called cure because it's not a paint, it's a silicone, and it's a two-part process, and the chemicals in the two parts work together to harden. So it takes a couple hours for the Psycho paint to dry. You can make it dry faster by putting it into the oven, but you want to put it on really lowest temperature, like 110 or something like that, and then you can leave it in for maybe about 5 minutes, five to 6 minutes. I didn't do that because I was in the middle of doing other things when I was making him, so I would put a coat of paint on and go do something and then come back in a couple hours and do a little bit more. It makes it kind of time consuming, and you're not able to finish as quickly as you might like, but it worked, fine. Now, as you can see, I'd already put the orange on the nails, and so I had some areas where that was not really smooth looking, and it bled over onto the skin part. So I'm just taking a darker green color, and I'm just outlining the nail, going around the edges to kind of cover up any places that the orange moved over and got onto the skin. And also I'm going to use that in the little creases, like for his knuckles, on his elbows, his knees, things like that, where I put little creases. I'm going to use that darker color in those creases. And that will help to give him some more dimension also. I think putting that around the nails really helped the way they look. As I think I said in a previous video, if I did this again, I would put the nails on after I molded the body. I would mold them separately, and I would color them separately, and then just use that silicone glue that I showed you. Well, I'll show it to you later when I put his ears on, to apply it to his nail beds. But other than that, it turned out fine. I camouflaged it just fine. So it turned out looking pretty good. You'll see. Oh, you saw him in the thumbnail, but you'll see more up close. So just now I'm taking a small brush, going over, and if you need to clean up the Psycho paint, you just use acetone. That cleans it up. And the silicone thinner I got at the same place I get the silicone. It's a place in Orlando called Reynolds, and I think you can get it on Amazon too. I just sometimes I'm a little concerned that if I buy something on Amazon that it might be old if it's not something that people use a lot of. I just don't know if people are buying a lot of this on Amazon. But this Reynolds Place, they sell all of the Smooth On products, which is all the silicones that I'm using. The Dragon Skin, the Eco 30 that I use to pour to mold the body, the silicone thinner. Um, they don't make Psycho Paint, but um, you can you could actually use any kind of silicone for the paint. Mix the Silk Pig into it, but the Psycho Paint works really well. I'm really happy with how it worked. And I did use Polysil, which is another kind of silicone, and it's pretty soft. It's a pretty soft silicone. I used that on another project. I wasn't quite as happy with that. I didn't really like how it as it cured. How it I don't know. It like looked too smooth and fake looking, whereas this tend to take on whatever technique that you use. Like if it was stippled on, it looked kind of rough. If not, if you smoothed it, it was smooth. But I wasn't really happy. And also, some of the areas where I painted with the Polysil, I found peeled off later, which might have been something I did. I'm not saying because like I'm new at this, but I didn't have that problem at all with the Psycho Paint. So I know I've heard that there are some people who use the paints for dolls, the silicone dolls, like the Polysil better because they feel it dries softer. It's a softer silicone than the Psycho Paint. But for this project, I didn't use the softest silicone for his body. I used the 30. There's a softer one that's 20, and it didn't really matter. So I'm happy with it. So I did that graduated red to orange look on the ears, and I'm going to let that dry. I did both ears, and they turned out looking good. So now that we've got all the paint on the body and the ears and everything's cured and dry, what we're going to do is mix up a little bit more of the dragon skin. We're just going to use it clear, and I'll put a little bit of thinner in it. What I want is a very, very thin coat, and we're going to put that over the whole body and the ears. What we want to do is matte him. He's so shiny now, he doesn't look like a Baby Yoda. And also, when they're shiny like this, everything sticks to them, especially dog hairs. But any kind of hairs, people hairs, lint, little piece of dirt. So we're going to matte him with this matting powder that I showed you. And to do that, we're going to put a very thin coat of the dragon skin with a little bit of thinner in it all over him. We're going to do front first and then back. And once you get the coat on with the brush, you can go over it with your hands, with the gloves, and just press down just to sort of make sure you got it, covered everywhere and everything's smooth. It kind of takes off a little bit if there's any extra on there because you want it to be a very, very thin coat. If you get too thick a coat, you put that powder on, it's just going to make a cake. You just want it to adhere to it. That's all you want. And I just used a makeup powder brush, foundation powder brush. And this powder is kind of expensive, although I found a place on eBay that it's a little bit cheaper. But when you buy it for this purpose, from a person who's selling it for this particular purpose, it's really expensive. So I see some people doing this, and they're just like throwing that powder all over them. And I was trying to be a little bit saving with it because I knew it's so expensive. But anyway, so you can just see I'm just powdering them up just like a little baby. And the powder sticks to the very light layer of silicone that I put down. So it's going to stay matted better than just putting it on without the silicone. Now you can do that. I also know that people use, like regular powder, like baby powder or cornstarch or something like that. I think this is just a really fine powder that works really well. I really like this. Now, after he dried, I turned him over and I'm going to do the exact same thing on the back. But I forgot to pat him with my hands, so I had a really hard time getting the silicone powder to be matte. It really started turning into like dough. Like I say, it's always an adventure at my house. Anyway, I finally got it pretty matted and it worked out okay. But don't forget to try to thin it out as much as you can. And if you try to go back and hit places that you didn't get it, which doesn't really work that well. You can also use this powder as he wears, like if you played with him a lot or whatever. You can use that powder to go back and freshen up his matted look and make it so that he's nice and soft to touch instead of sticky to touch. All right, we're going to attach the ears now and have that wire that's up at the top as you've seen before. It's embedded in the mold of the ears. So I want to stick it into the head about 2.5 to 3 inches because those ears are so heavy. I think it'll help to hold the ear up in addition to the glue that we're going to put on them. So the next thing you got to do is, position it. And from the pictures that I saw of him, the ears are pretty much halfway back between the front and the back of the head. You're going to this is the Silpoxy. This is the glue, the epoxy glue. And it dries really fast. It dries in about 5 to 6 minutes. So you have to work pretty fast with it. But that's good because, whatever you're gluing, it's going to hold it. And you don't have to wait for like an hour for it to set up like you do with the others. So I'm measuring here. I cut those ears pretty much to match the shape of the head. And the thing that you want to do is make sure you get it far enough up, on the head so that you've got room for the whole ear because it's pretty big. So a couple of mistakes I made I'll share with you. I stuck the ear in on both sides. There I'm using some pliers to just push it further into the head, which you really need to do. You can't really push it with your fingers enough. Plus it keeps the wire from going out the end of the ear by using the pliers. So I put both ears on and I was thinking that I could glue it laying like that. That didn't work. So as I put the first ear on, I had to take the other ear out, which meant I lost the little hole where I had put it in because once you take something like that out of silicone, the hole just closes up and you can't find it. So that was another mistake I made. Yeah, all the adventures I have. So exciting. But when I made the second one, I knew what I had done on the first one wrong, and I was able to correct it, and things went a lot smoother. So, live and learn, right? The other thing was I shouldn't have powdered him before I did the glue because I actually did have to. I put the glue on the ear and then it didn't stick because of that powder. So what you want to do is you want to clean off that area where the ear is going to be with some acetone just to get it nice and clean and smooth and back to the sticky part of the silicone. And then put this glue on. So there's another couple of things. Do the matting last. You don't want to do that and then put the ear on. I actually kind of forgot, like I was thinking, I'm done, yay. And then I remembered, oh, he's got ears. I got to put the ears on. All right, so I am going to mix some of that color with this glue so that I can try to match it to the skin. And that worked pretty well, other than the fact that the first ear didn't stick. The first time I had to take it off, clean the body, and start over and do it again. But once that worked, it was fine. It did work fine, and it hardened nice and fast. Another thing that I lost was putting the hair on his head. He's got that little sparse looking hair. What I did is I used green yarn and I cut it in little tiny pieces, like 1/4 of an inch long, and then I just put a coat of clear silicone on top of his head, and then I just stuck the fibers of the yarn down in it, and that worked really well. So here's, I propped him up on two different uh, bottles here so that I could let that one ear dry. And so now I'm going to put the other ear in, and then I'll turn him over and let him dry that way. So this is an idea for you because that ear is so long. The dragon skin bottles were the perfect length to put. I've got, the two bottles with paper towel in between them, and then his ear goes down in between the bottles, and then I use the mixing cup for his body to hold him till I could, let the glue dry. So you can see that worked really well. So we got the ears on, and that's pretty much it. Like I said, I lost the part where I made his outfit, and also the part where I cut the eyes out. But I am going to show you how I made the eyes out of resin. That was fairly easy to do, and something I think we've made eyes before. I may have already had the mold, so we made the mold earlier in this process, if you remember, out of some easy mold silicone. So I'll just show you how I made the eyes, because the eyes are really big and it's really difficult to find them. So we have our mold here that we made. This is about 20 millimeters. I'm going to use some 2-part epoxy resin for this. Here's another tip for you. Don't use resin that's over a year old. I actually had to do this project twice, which is why you don't see me pull the eyes out at the end. I'm sorry about that. But the resin that I used here, the bubbles would not get out of it. That's a lighter, and if you light epoxy like that, run a flame over it, the bubbles will pop. But even though I put the epoxy in and did run the flame over it, bubbles formed down inside of it, like at the base of it after I had done it. And so I did the whole process, and then when I took the eyes out of the mold, they were just full of bubbles. So I had to buy brand new epoxy, and my husband told me, yeah, epoxy can get old, so you can't keep it around. I think it looked like it turned a little bit yellow too, so it wasn't really clear. So anyway, with the process I can show you, and you can do it with some good epoxy, is to put the epoxy in there about half full. Then we're going to paint in the details of the eyes, and I'm using sort of a yellow ochre color, brown, and some black. Now, you want to remember that what you put down first is going to be what shows in the eye in the foreground, because the front of the eye is pointed down. So we want the pupil to be dominant. So I'm going to do the pupil first. So we're just going to make a big black pupil, because he has pretty big pupil. Sometimes I don't even see the rest of his eye, but occasionally there are shots where I'll see it. So I'm making a fairly large, round black pupil with this acrylic paint. This is the epoxy in this mold had already dried. It takes overnight, so this is another long process. So this is dried. I filled it about halfway full. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our design in, and then we'll fill it the rest of the way up with epoxy after it dries, and that'll give us the full shape that we need, which is, it's about 22 millimeters, yeah. All right, so that's about the size of the pupil, and I'm just going to do the same thing on the other side. Try to make sure we get them about the same size, which I'm never good at. It's like if you ever try to do two things like this, the same size and the same shape, it's so hard. Oh, but it came out pretty good, even though I had to do it twice. I did find some epoxy that worked really well. Thank goodness for Amazon. I can get it in 2 days. Because I'm working the whole time I'm doing this. I work during the day, and then I come home and I do this kind of stuff at night. And I just don't have the time to be running around, to craft stores or Michael's or whatever. And I was kind of concerned to get the same kind anyway, because at that time I didn't know, well, is it this type of epoxy? Is it just not compatible with this kind of silicone? So I was trying to find actually a different kind, and they only carry that one kind, other than there's another kind they have, but it's in like a half gallon or something. And I didn't really want to get that much because obviously it would go bad. It would get old and go bad. So this process, what I want to do is have the big dark pupil, and then I will go in and put the colors that I want to show in the front first, and then the ones that I want to show in the background second. So the first thing would be the yellow color, which he seems to have kind of right around the pupil, or there might be a little flecks of it that go out to the side, all the way to the sides. But there's the pupils. They did pretty good. The eyes are dark, so it's kind of hard to see, you know, that it would be very detailed. So that's that's one good thing for me anyway. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm just putting little black streaks out from the pupil, not together, because I want this yellow and the brownish color to show in between. So I'm just like spokes on a wheel. I'm just going around with this thin brush and putting these little spokes in. I'll do that on both sides. And then I'm going to go back in and start putting in the yellow, because that will be what sort of shows around the pupil. And if you put a little bit of water in your paint, it makes this easier to do. Makes it easier to do the little strips. Otherwise, it can clump up. Of course, I had to, do it first for you to have it clump up so I could tell you not to do it. I make all the mistakes, so you don't have to. But anyway, after you get all the little black streaks in, you're going to kind of let that dry, because you're going to be kind of painting on top of it. And if you start right away, you might smear it a little bit. So I'm mixing a little bit of brown with that yellowish color so that it's not too yellow. I want it to be sort of a really soft yellowish brown. And then we're going to use that color right around the pupil. It's so funny that I'm not finishing this product and the show is already ended. Oh well. I tried. And I tried selling it on eBay, and then, Disney was so threatened by my Baby Yoda that they made me take it down. So I still have 2 Baby Yodas, if anybody's interested. I would love to sell one of them. But they're cute. I mean, I would probably have kept one of them anyway. I probably would have only sold one. I'd probably sell the second one because it's less fraught with mistakes. Although somebody who didn't know better would probably not spot it. But because I know the things that I had to do and do over. So I didn't feel as comfortable with selling that one. So I would have not sold it. I would have kept it. And he was my first one anyway, my first baby. So I kind of want to keep him. So now I'm just adding little streaks of that yellow and then a little bit darker brown in between the black spokes that I did earlier. And that's going to give it the look of a real eye, because eyes are not one color. They have a lot of different shades of color, and they sort of, look like spokes coming out of the wheel. Very fine, but it does kind of look that way coming out from the pupil. And it gives it a nice depth and dimension too. So once we get all the color in, we're going to let that dry. It doesn't take long for acrylic paint. And then I'm going to put another coat of the clear epoxy and fill it all the way up to the top. And that'll give us our eyes. And then all we have to do is cut out the green part on Baby Yoda and stick them in. You kind of have to cut, back into the head, because the eyes are wider than the opening of the eye, so the eye sits within that, just like a real human eye. All right, so this is dried, and now I'm mixing this up. The second time, we're going to put the clear coat there on the top of the painted part, let that dry overnight, and then it's ready to go. So you can see I'm kind of doing this in steps as I go. Like if something's drying, I'll go back because you can see Baby Yoda in the background. Doesn't even have his ears on. So I was kind of doing this part in between, like he's drying. You had to put some paint on him, let him dry. Then I'm gonna, make the eyes and everything. So it all kind of came together in the end, and the eyes ended up working out pretty well. And these are the ones, as you can see. And I think you can see too the hair. That's like the yarn that I glued on top of his head. So here's how he looks without his clothes on in the front. And you can see I like the little mottled look that he has. And then that's how he looks from the back. And I like that the ears, really look pretty much the same color. They don't look like they were done separately. And this was an outfit I made for him, and it has a ring around the top where the collar is that's stuffed with fiberfill, and then it's tightly tied around his neck. And I did that because without that, his head will just flop over because he's made of silicone. But I always thought he had to have something on under that coat anyway. So this is like his little undershirt, his little tunic, and then I made the coat to go on top of that. And it has a Velcro closure over on one side, and then it has that nice top, that sheepskin collar. And there's a view from the side where you can see the collar kind of comes around on one side also. And another view from the front. And that's our finished Baby Yoda. Like I said, I'm really happy with how he came out. I think he looks a lot like the real one. And I'm pleased with this being my first time doing anything with silicone, that I didn't completely screw it up. So I really hope you enjoyed this project. We're going to do something different next time. We're finished with Baby Yoda. We're going to move on, do another project. And as always, I hope you subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Thanks, and bye.